Okay, looks like we're getting up here. Giddy up. Let's see here. All right, let's do this thing. What it is, Max 6 Cool. I don't know what you're laughing at, but if you're laughing at me, well, that's sad. All right, so today we got The Dark Knight. I don't know about you. It's been, I don't know, at least a week since I've seen this movie. And so let me give you a little backstory. Now, I have to skip this one. Survivor's on, man. Survivor? Spoiler alert, they all die. I've actually never seen a episode of Survivor. All right, so backstory. My backstory for The Dark Knight is so Dark Knight came out in 2008, so 12 years ago. Dang, that's a long time ago. And uh, I had just left to be a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And if you don't know, what they do is you go out for 2 years and you don't watch any movies for 2 years because you're very focused on what you're doing. And The Dark Knight came out like 2 weeks or something after I left. And so for a solid 2 years, all I heard was how incredible The Dark Knight was. And so what was the movie that I watched the night I got home in 2010 was The Dark Knight. And so I watched this bad boy, and I'm not going to lie, I was disappointed. I mean, this movie had 2 years of solid hype of everybody saying how amazingly incredible it was. And I was a little disappointed. And I was thinking about it and everything. And then I watched it again. I think it may have been the next day or like 2 days later. And that's when I'm like, okay, this movie straight up is amazing. And so that's kind of my introduction to The Dark Knight. No movie can live up to 2 years of hype, but now I see it truly as one of the greatest just films in general of all time, in my humble opinion, at least. All right, and so when I was re-watching it again, one of the things that stood out to me is how often Christopher Nolan portrays the Joker in a close-up. And I had never noticed it before. And I started to think, well, why is that? Well, because most of the Joker's acting is in his face, is in that licking of the lips and as he talks. And it's the want to know how I got these scars and the why so serious. And, all that stuff that's going on in the face or region of Heath Ledger. And so I thought it was pretty interesting how it was all close-ups. Not all, but mostly close-ups. And he only kind of went to the medium close-ups and the close-ups, but he only went to the medium and the full wide shots to show, kind of the physicality of the Joker when it was necessary. For instance, like when he kicks Batman after the big rig thing, of course, and so all of that stuff. All right, so Daily Scientist, if you don't mind, can you tell us why you couldn't watch movies and what other things change? I assume you're talking about when I was a missionary. So when you're a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, so the guys that or girls that have the black name tags, the guys wear white shirts and ties, and you might see them on bicycles or walking around. Be nice to them. They're out there volunteering and doing this for 2 years. But there's a lot of things that missionaries, when I went, that we didn't watch television, we didn't watch movies, we didn't listen to like AC/DC or Led Zeppelin, bands that I do like, because it was all about 24/7. We were either sleeping or we were out serving people and helping people or teaching people, and so it was very much just 2 years of just focused on one single thing, and so that's the reason you don't watch movies, because movies, when you're supposed to be doing one thing, just the purpose of doing that missionary work is not watching movies. So you give it up for 2 years. And so me as a filmmaker, giving it up for 2 years was intense. But now I often tell missionaries who are going out, like, 19-year-olds or 18-year-olds who are going, I'm like, oh man, I just don't know how I can miss movies. I'm like, bro, if I could have gone 2 years without watching one single movie, you can do it. Another thing, funny story about that. I was in Colorado for part of it, New Mexico for another part of it, and me and my companion. There's always at least two of you, 2 to 3. Usually it's just 2. And we walked into like this we were in this trailer park. It was in the kind of, not the middle of the night, but it was probably like 7 or 8 o'clock at night in a snowy Colorado winter. We walk into this old trailer, this little Mexican family, and we're talking to them just kind of in their kitchen. But on the TV, they were playing a movie, and it looks like out of the corner of our eyes, I mean, we kind of could see what was going on. And it looked so intense. And it was like just all these explosions and like these robots, and there was Christian Bale shooting this big gun. And we're like, what movie was that? After we left, we were like, no, what movie was that? We had no idea. None whatsoever. I didn't find out until about a year later when I finally got home and watched the movie Terminator Salvation. And I realized this was the movie that I saw in that trailer. Finally, I know what it was. And but the movie wasn't very good. So, because it was that very opening scene that we saw, if you remember what it was. And also while I was gone, Avatar came out, and everybody, raved about how great Avatar was. It was kind of a difficult part of it, but it also was a fun part of it, getting home and catching up on 2 years movies. All right, but back to Dark Knight. This time around, as I watched it, I noticed all the close-ups with the Joker, and of course, his performance just stands out like crazy. Fun fact: I played the Joker, the Heath Ledger version of the Joker, in a haunted house once in 2012, and I had the full get-up, and it was a haunted house where we could actually touch people. One of those where you got to sign a waiver and everything to go through it. And I had, the knife, and I'd go up to, I'd actually get to go up to people and grab them and, kind of stick the knife at their mouth. And I remember this one girl just dropped to the floor, absolutely bawling her eyes out. And it was the only time I kind of broke character and just said, all right, just go. But, there's something about it, getting up to somebody and doing the why so serious line with a fake knife. So it was pretty cool. Okay, so first off, I want to know what the 4 of you think about The Dark Knight. 5 of you now. What's up? And if you like The Dark Knight, it's been 12 years since it came out, and so I was a little curious and started perusing the internet of, what are people still saying about The Dark Knight? And I came across something from Screen Rants just from actually the month of March, so pretty recently. And it was like 10 reasons why The Dark Knight is still great. And I thought it'd be fun to kind of go through these. So number 10, it says, it's the best take on what a real-life superhero would look like. So I mentioned that, when I was a missionary, I had 2 years of hype for this movie. And I remember one guy saying, he was like a 20-year-old actor, and we were talking to him, and he talked about The Dark Knight, and he said, the thing that makes The Dark Knight movie so good is that it is what Batman would really be like if he actually existed. It's like what this whole world would be like if it actually existed in our world. Marvel, it doesn't really take that route. The Batman, the Zack Snyder Batman certainly don't take that route. But they look excited. So if you've never seen The Dark Knight, oh my goodness. Well, there's going to be some spoilers in this thing. Oh, you got to see it. I would say turn off this stream right now and go watch it. Okay, but it is the great take on what the superheroes would look like in our world. The number 9 reason Screen Rant gives that it's pretty great is that it's dark and gritty tone. But I would say, it's dark and gritty tone, yet still realistic. So the term gritty kind of has a few connotations when you talk to a filmmaker. Gritty can mean realistic, and it can also mean, very, gritty in its look. And so gritty in its tone and gritty in its look are kind of two different things, in my opinion. When you, like, the Zack Snyder Batmans are gritty in their look. They're very grainy. They kind of have that cinema verite feel a little bit to a certain degree. But
But Christopher Nolan's is gritty in that it's realistic. It's not exaggerated action. It's not, with a few exceptions. I mean, there's the whole, a lot of the things that Bruce Wayne does as Batman is unrealistic, but it's also, you believe it. But the Dark Knight is very gritty in that sense. The number 8 reason Screen Rant gives that Dark Knight's awesome is that it's the best portrayal of the supervillain. And that I would pretty much have to agree with, no questions asked. I mean, we have a lot of great supervillains. We have the Jack Nicholson Joker. We have the Jared Leto Joker. Oh, well, actually, no. Never mind. Let's not even talk about him. We have Thanos. We have, just Lon Rog from, Captain Marvel or whatever his name is. We have all these villains, but the Heath Ledger Joker is in a class of its own. The mystery of his backstory adds fuels to his enigmatic nature. And of course, just because it's always so hard to realize what makes him tick. It's like, and it's the only instance where I've really seen it too, where a villain's motivation can be he just wants to see chaos. Because so many villains, like Thanos. Thanos is the complete opposite of this. He doesn't just want chaos. He actually wants to fix chaos. He actually wants to wipe out 50% of life in the universe so that there will be more peace and that there won't be chaos anymore. And that works for Thanos. But the Joker is the exact opposite. And so often a villain needs a realistic motive. In my mind, the best villains are the ones who don't think they're villains, that think they're great. It's like Al Capone did not think of himself as a bad guy. But the Joker, he straight up sees that he's the bad guy. He is the yin to Batman's yang. He is everything Batman isn't. And it's the only instance that I can think of, at least, that it really, really worked. So Caleb Jones, Caleb, what's up? My third son's named Caleb. I think we talked about that. We have some pretty good Star Wars villains. Yeah, so Darth Vader, at first we didn't really know what made him tick, and it worked really, really well. So he kind of fits into this Joker category. What are some, and of course there's Sidious. Does Sidious see himself as a bad guy, or does he see himself as a good guy? I wonder. That would be a question. What do you guys think? Never really thought about that. Probably should, but that's interesting. What are some other Star Wars villains that you really like? Okay. The number 7 reason Screen Rant gives about The Dark Knight that it's great is it's directed by one of the best modern directors, Christopher Nolan. Couldn't agree more. Some of my favorite films are Christopher Nolan films. The Prestige is my favorite of his. Inception and Dark Knight are probably tied for second. Just kind of looking at my shelf over here to see what other Chris Nolan films I have. I did love Inception. Not Inception. I loved Interstellar. I am abundantly stoked for Tenet. I think it looks awesome. Christian Bale played the best live-action Batman. I agree. Move over Batfleck, move over Michael Keaton. I think Christian Bale is the best Batman. Michael Keaton's probably second. But much better than Clooney. And although Val Kilmer, I like the Val Kilmer Batman. All right. Realistic problems. This is what the Screen Rant thing says, is that I'm not sure if I agree with this one, but they are. I think what they're saying here is that the problems aren't like a galactic problem, like Marvel films are. It's not about saving the universe; it's about saving his town or his city, and of course his personal problems are with trying to save Rachel, but he wants to see Harvey Dent succeed, but he also wants to get Rachel back. And so, all right, this is a perfect want versus need thing again. Batman Bruce Wayne, needs to give up the mantle of Batman. The whole entire reason in the Christopher Nolan trilogy that he became Batman was to inspire his city to go against bad, to go against evil. And he's doing that. You know, you got the Batman copycats that we see at the beginning, which he doesn't really agree with, but so he doesn't want like what they're doing, but he likes what Harvey Dent doing. He likes that the DA is finally not corrupt. He likes that Jim Gordon is really fighting crime. He wants to see all these things succeed, and he feels that as Batman he's done that. And so he really wants Harvey Dent to be the White Knight, right? But as Harvey Dent rises, Rachel's probably just gonna fall in love with him more. And so it's that really hard dichotomy, that problem that Bruce Wayne has in this moment, where he needs Harvey Dent to be the White Knight, but he wants Rachel Dent. And so they're almost diametrically opposed things. Harvey Dent, can we trust him? That's a good question. Asked many times in the first few minutes of the film. All right, Caleb Jones says Darth Maul. Yeah, Darth Maul definitely, fleshed out in the cartoons. I'm very anxious to see him in the latest Clone Wars, to see what they do with his character. His death is probably one of my favorite moments of all of Star Wars. When I rewatched all of Rebels again, I was really kind of touched by it, actually, to be honest. I thought them not really fighting at all was a great, great touch. So Darth Maul's a great villain. And he kind of, he has a big arc throughout his character where he's totally driven by hatred and revenge to eventually realizing that he can't control the Force and he has to submit to the will of the Force, like a Jedi does. So he kind of almost dies a Jedi, a pseudo Jedi, a gray Jedi maybe. All right, what else the Screen Rant says? And typically I like Screen Rant. I like what they say. Okay. It's inspired by some of the greatest Batman stories. Cool. I'll go with that. I've never really read that many Batman comics, but Imperfect Heroes. So I think this is a pretty good thing, and I think this is what Marvel also gets right, is that our heroes are far from perfect. Captain America may be the only exception there, but Tony Stark is not perfect. He's selfish. He's arrogant, as is Doctor Strange. I mean, at least at first. But Batman specifically is really flawed. Bruce Wayne is a very tortured person, from losing his parents to all the way trying to get the girl that he loves, the one person who, keeps him grounded in life. And we'll see tomorrow when you watch Dark Knight Rises, if you watch it, how much he comes unhinged. Although I have my opinions about what they did with him in The Dark Knight Rises. And I don't love it. Spoiler alert. And by the way, I won't be streaming tomorrow. It is my hot wife's birthday, so I get to deal with that, baby. All right. So, but the imperfect heroes, is particularly, we have Bruce Wayne and Harvey Dent, of course. Harvey Dent, in his desire to do good, goes bad. It's what we were just talking about, how bad guys almost never see themselves as bad guys. They always see themselves as a good person, as doing something maybe for their family, or doing something like for Anakin. Anakin, of course, did not see himself as bad because he thought the Jedi were bad. He thought he was ridding the galaxy of something evil, but particularly he was doing it to save his wife. So Red Hood 23 says, imperfections are a screenwriter's goldmine. I'm glad you brought that up. A lot of times screenwriters, myself included, we think of, we got to make our characters, these perfect things. But the more imperfections you give them, kind of the more interesting they become. Because nobody is perfect, with the exception of, the Savior. But it's, nobody in films should be perfect, because if they start off perfect, where are they going to go as a character? What's their arc at that point? What makes it interesting to watch this person's journey? And Harvey, Harvey, I mean, he's the tragedy to Bruce's, victory, right? Where he starts off as this White Knight, this almost perfect character, but he allows his pursuit of the perfection in the sense of ridding the city of crime. He allows that pursuit to drive him down the path that takes him to the exact opposite of his goal. So it's it's the one time where I'm a perfectionist is the imperfection. So let's see here. Now, what else is Screen Rant saying? It's a brilliant villain origin, and this is particularly talking about Two-Face, and just kind of what we were talking about there. All right, and number one Screen Rant gives is that it's among the best acting in superhero films. I think that's pretty solid. I actually did think as I was watching it that there really aren't cheesy parts in this film. I mean, can you imagine? It's like Maroney, or whatever his name is. Maroney, I think it is. He says, he's a two-bit clown in a cheap suit or whatever. You could see how, well, we have seen with the Joker how it can become cheesy very, very quickly. We saw that with Jared Leto's Joker, where it was just, I mean, I felt, of course it's my opinion, but I felt it just got very over the top very, very quickly, where it just like, I don't believe there's a person on earth that acts like this. But with the Heath Ledger Joker, you felt from the beginning that he was the person he was portraying. And it's incredibly difficult to do that, and he rightfully deserved the Oscar for it. And I have not seen the movie Joker, so I couldn't tell you how Joaquin Phoenix did it. But I've also heard that he did a fantastic job as well. And so, but the acting, is solid in this film. Christian Bale does a bang-up job. He's just a naturally talented actor. He's been doing it since Empire of the Sun. He knows what's up. Steven Spielberg knew what he was doing when he casted him all those years ago. So what do you guys think of The Dark Knights? We've had, so Dalek Science has never seen it. Red Hood 23, what do you think of The Dark Knights? What would you rate it? Caleb, if you're still here, what would you guys rate it? I loved it. It was such a pleasure to watch it again. And I think, the chase underneath, on the lower levels of Gotham is incredible. So much great model work in that. When you watch the behind the scenes of how they use models to do a lot of those things, it's fantastic. Let's see here. The other parts that I noticed were with Christopher Nolan is, I don't know if you noticed, but Christopher Nolan isn't fancy about his camera work, and I like that. For me personally, I'm not. I like Quentin Tarantino, what he does, how he frames things. I think it's very, very cool, but it's just also not my style. It's something that I appreciate and really, really like, but also is not something I try to emulate. I'm more about, as a director, kind of this Christopher Nolan school of thought, where it's all about just telling the story in the most effective way with the camera. So the Christopher Nolan camera is very invisible. You don't really notice it much. One thing that I stole from Dark Knight for Vader was the idea of crossing the line in an intense conversation between two individuals. So when you go back and look at the interrogation scene between the Joker and Batman, the camera, I wish I could show it to you, but I'll get copyrighted. They're both sitting down, and the camera is constantly going behind them. And if it's on this side shooting at the Joker, then when it cuts to Batman, it's over here. And so it's then crossed the line. If you don't know what the line is, it's the line of action, the 180-degree rule. I've done a video on it, so if you're interested in learning more, just check out my videos and you can look it up. All right, so Red Hood 23 says, The Dark Knight is a masterpiece. Nolan kills it with this one. I do miss the more comic book aesthetic of Begins, but Dark Knight is just a whole other level. Yeah, that's a good point. He does have the more of the comic book feel in the first one, in both the production design and particularly the production design. But yeah, it totally goes more realistic in the Dark Knight. It's like, they have the elevated train in Batman Begins, and the whole city is kind of CG, and you got the Narrows and Arkham Asylum and all that stuff. But yeah, it goes much more realistic, and I think that's what makes The Dark Knight just so cool. Is it feels like this could be happening in Chicago right now. All right, so it might be my favorite Batman movie made by Nolan. It's definitely my, of the three, it's definitely my favorite. For me, it's The Dark Knight, Batman Begins, then Dark Knight Rises. And I've only seen Dark Knight Rises twice, I think, and it's been since it like virtually came out. So I'm excited to go watch that again tomorrow. But back to the idea of crossing the line. So during that Joker Batman interrogation scene, as the camera is constantly moving behind the characters and crossing the line, it adds that sense of who's going to win, what's going on, and it kind of adds to the increasing of the tension. And so I straight up lifted that out of Nolan's playbook for the moment in Shards of the Past where the Emperor pulls the lightsaber out on Vader and puts it to his neck. If you watch that little moment, I do that same thing where I cross the line as the camera moves behind the two characters to accentuate that it's a moment where you're meant to feel uncomfortable. Because when you cross the line, either consciously, if you really do it egregiously, or subconsciously makes the viewer uncomfortable. It disorients them a little bit because for a brief moment, they have to reorient themselves. Again, a lot of times this is subconsciously, so it has that intended effect of making the viewer a little uncomfortable. But in general, Nolan's camera work is pretty, I'm not going to say simple, but it's not flashy. And I really like it. It's something that I do try to emulate. I'm kind of if I had to kind of define my style that I try to emulate for other films, like Shards of the Past isn't a good emulation of this because I was kind of more mimicking the Lucasfilm feel, the Star Wars feel, but the George Lucas feel. But I like kind of a cross between Nolan and Spielberg. I love the push-ins that Spielberg has, and there's a few of those in Shards of the Past. But I also like the simplicity and just the general efficiency that Nolan has. And I think it's brilliant, and it's incredibly difficult to do. Because when you are watching The Dark Knight, you're never thinking about, oh, that's a cool camera move. Maybe a few times, but very, very rarely. It's all about you are sucked into the story. It's like how Dumb and Dumber, how Jim Carrey says it's like a tractor beam, sucked me right in. Woo! So I love his camera work. All right, so Caleb, all right, yeah. What did some of you other guys think about The Dark Knight? This is probably the best film on the list. One of my favorites. Heath Ledger, of course, is incredible. Who's the girl who plays Rachel? I'm blanking. Maggie Gyllenhaal also does a great job. All right, so Red 23. What Nolan did with the Joker was genius. He and Heath knew it wasn't about making him crazy, but about control. The Joker always has control no matter what. That's just who he is. Yeah, I think that's a great point. It wasn't about him being crazy. And if you notice, Nolan addresses that right off the bat in the scene where the Joker comes to that group therapy session in broad daylight with all of the mobsters, where somebody says, you're crazy. And he's like, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. And he says it very seriously, like, you don't know what you're talking about. I am not crazy. And so Nolan wanted to get that out of the way very, very early on, that the Joker was he wasn't just an insane person. He wasn't somebody who had broken out of Arkham. Although, who knows, maybe he was. But he was somebody who was, I think, Red Hood, you said it great. Yeah, all about control. About proving that it was pointless to try to have control. So he wanted to control a situation to prove that you could not control things. He wanted to be that agent of chaos, but he wanted to be the progenitor of that agent of that chaos. And so he's, the more you analyze the Joker, the deeper you do see his levels of genius, or psychosis, I guess. But the deeper you get, the more you see what makes his character tick. And so that's a good comment. Any other comments before we end this bad boy tonight? Anything else about The Dark Knight you guys want to bring up. I loved how they updated Batman's suits, from the long time of him not being able to turn his head to being a little bit more agile. Again, it's one of those many things that the film does to make it more realistic. Gary Oldman, of course, does a bang-up job in this film. You would never know that he's not American because he's just so good. I mean, you never know Christian Bale's not. His accent's so good. All right. So Red Hood 23, all it takes is just one bad day to turn the most sanest man alive into lunacy. The Killing Joke. True, and we see that with Harvey Dent. This whole shenanigans happens very, very quickly in his descent into madness, in his descent into not being the White Knight anymore. So that's a great point. Great point. All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for joining me tonight. Again, no stream tomorrow, but should definitely check out The Dark Knight Rises. We'll kind of briefly talk about it on the next stream. So, yeah, you guys are awesome. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all the comments. I hope you enjoy the film tomorrow. And stay safe, stay healthy. I went to the grocery store today, and it was crazy. Everybody was wearing masks and stuff. And I hope this thing all ends soon. So remember to stay spiffy. And don't do anything I wouldn't do twice.